Hey folks, welcome back to Corax and Coffee Cast. I'm your host, Pete Steele.
And I'm your other host, Rick Hendricks.
And we are all about playing tabletop games in public.
We're all about bringing new people into the hobby and pushing back hard against the stereotype that gamers, especially board gamers and nerds, are asocial beings.
We also want to thank our behind-the-scenes contributors, our producer, Keegan King, our editor of all things and social media manager, Sarah Vasa, and our game enthusiast consultant, Miss Shaw.
So thank you for joining us today. Today we'll be discussing different types of gamers and different styles of play. You may have already heard of some of these. There's the term power gamer, rules lawyer, and there's some others. We'll list them out here shortly. These are known as gamer types, but really they're styles of play and their motivations for play. And one of our greatest hopes at Corax and Coffee is for the increase and expansion of people coming into the hobby.
And we want to see an ever-increasing diversity of people, of cultures, of ideas, of games. And we want to invite people into the hobby who might not find the hobby otherwise, unless they were actively invited in. Many people will find this hobby on their own, and others really need to kind of be exposed to the hobby.
It's true.
So with bringing in different types of individuals, there are going to be different types of gamers, different types of people playing games who have different interests and thoughts and ideas and values and motivations for playing.
Now, it goes without being said that we're just verbalizing this to bring it to the forefront.
So the lens we're looking through is that there are many different types of gamers, but not stereotypically. If you have 1,000 people who play games and keep subdividing, you're going to have 1,001 different types of gamers, each with their own traits and quirks and whatnot.
On the one hand, we are interested in busting down stereotypes of gamers. While gamer traits can be organized into different categories, it's good to remember that there are always exceptions. We're not just going to give you a list of different types of gamers because you don't need us for that.
Yeah, no. You can easily on your own go to Google, type in types of gamers or board gamers, and you will get pages with 5 or 8 or 10 or 20 different types of gamers. So that's really not quite what we're doing here.
What we're mostly attacking here is the problem gamer stereotype. And this is an assumption that there are problem gamers and non-problem gamers. So problem gamers are typically thought of to be power gamers, rules lawyers, and the Deliberators, to name a few.
And very often, non-problem gamers are thought to be, for example, games librarians, people who just have hundreds or more, maybe even 1,000 games in their library that you can go to and just grab a game and start playing.
Or hosts.
Or hosts, right. Hosts are quite valuable.
Mm-hmm.
So the problem is that there's this idea that you don't want problem gamers in your gaming group, and you do want non-problem gamers in your gaming group. And you want to try and, there's this idea that you want to maximize certain types of gamers in your group and minimize others. And we have a different perspective on this.
That's right. Rather than thinking of power gamers as a problem, we think it makes much more sense to consider different gamers and different gamer types within their proper context. The reality is very few gamers are actually trying to be problems for the sake of being problems, and very, very few are trying to ruin game night. Different gamers have different motivations, and we think it's important to try and understand what makes a power gamer or a rules lawyer tick, and how to incorporate the strengths that they have into a gaming group that might otherwise shut it down.
We're not saying, though, that all people are well-suited to play games with all other people. Some people just don't fit in a particular social space for whatever reason.
Right. Some people, you bring them together and they are like oil and vinegar. They cannot get along together. And that's okay.
Right. And it's important to recognize. What we are saying, though, is that there is a reason why people play. Each individual plays the way they do. And there are many different game groups for people to fit into. It's so easy. It's too easy to pass off or label something or someone as a problem and pass them off on somebody else.
Right.
It's also easy, I think, at least in the short term, to push something annoying under the rug and let it fester. And then people become angry, bitter, and people leave the gaming group. And then that little annoyance has become a problem, and it becomes the end of your gaming group, which is just no good.
And also, if you successfully convince them that they're a problem, that can stick with them and actually make them a problem. If you convince somebody, oh, you're no good, that can mess them up as they move into other groups as well. But first thing first, Rules lawyers and power gamers are people. They have certain motivations and ideas about how game night should go and how to play, and there's something they're enjoying about their game night. And that's why they play the way they do. Now, some of these are going to be very compatible with each other, and some are going to take some finagling to make it work together properly.
I do want to mention that at Corax and Coffee, we are trying to approach different gamer types and play styles through the lens of how we can maximize the possibility of bringing new people to the table and into gaming groups and into the hobby. You know, we try and look at pretty much everything through this lens in one way or another.
And the reality is some types of gamers or traits of gamers are much better suited for veteran play and experienced gaming groups than one where newbies are coming. We want to celebrate the diversity of different gamer motivations and play styles, but it's also important to talk about the realities of some of these things. Because if somebody who's new to the hobby comes in, certain types of gaming can be very off-putting. If for no other reason than a newbie really isn't going to understand what's going on with the minutia of different sorts of rules because A, they don't know the terminology, and B, they're not going to be nearly as invested as people who've been there for a long time. So they'll wonder, why the heck do we have to get into this so deeply? Why can't we just play the game?
So that's a lot of preamble from us. So let's get into it, and let's actually start by talking about a gamer type that we've already mentioned several times, and that is the power gamer. A couple of typical, but by no means universal traits of the power gamer. A couple that come to my mind are that the power gamer is trying to dominate the game space and the other players, whether it be a narrative game or any other type of game. They want to maximize their power and influence in the game, and that can look many, many different ways. But that's really their motivation, is to dominate.
I have a little bit of a power gamer living within me, so I wouldn't say it's necessarily about dominating.
Okay.
I do want to maximize my impact on the game, but that's mostly just about I want to be present and important. I don't necessarily want anybody else to be less important. So my LARP's about to reset. What they're going to do is they're going to bring the current game to a close, and then we're going to skip forward ahead in time and start over with new characters. A few weeks ago, they released a new preview for the next rulebook, and I just got giddy. I broke out this rulebook and some scratch paper, and I fiddled and tinkered for hours about how I was going to spend my new points and how I could position myself in the story in a way where I was important and I knew what to do right away and could influence a lot of things. The added possibility, and as Pete has said before, the possibility space I was exploring is just so euphoric. And I think at this point I've got about 3 different character builds, all optimized and shiny. So yeah, it's not so much about me wanting to win, but I do want to be somebody you have to watch out for.
Yeah, that's totally fair. I think some positives about this gamer type, about power gamers, is that it's likely that they can be quite adept at helping other players with strategy if they're willing to. And they have a lot of fun exploring the space and maximizing their own potential. I think another potential benefit is if they do rub other gamers the wrong way, to an extent, too much is too much, but to an extent, that can actually generate conflict in the game that can actually be used to fuel the game and motivate players to play their best.
Exactly. PvP is something that you have to be very careful about, that it doesn't spill outside of the game or become too fractious inside of the game. But knowing that somebody else is going to go accomplish their goals if you don't hurry up can help.
Right. Rick, you mentioned that, you, the power gamer within you, wants to feel like they matter.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear that. I do. I think one potential negative of a power gamer amongst gamers who are not power gamers is that because a power gamer is going to try and break scenarios by over-optimizing their own power, it can make other players feel superfluous, like they don't matter.
Right. And that's certainly something I have to fight within myself, of saying, okay, I've got somebody here that due to personality or my experience, I could really steamroll if I wanted to, but maybe this isn't the best time for that, and maybe I should step back and see what they do with this situation. But it's a struggle. So one thing that really helps the power gamer in me to be engaged is to play a game with a lot of strategic options and let me brew a little bit, let me come up with something clever. If I'm able to get a little piece of the pie, I'm usually happy leaving the rest for somebody else.
One thing I've already mentioned briefly is that the tension and conflict that can be generated between a power gamer and other gamers can actually drive a game and a story forward. And I think I mentioned a few episodes ago that I used to run a Dungeons and Dragons campaign that had 12 players in it, which was a lot to balance. One of the characters in that 12-player campaign was a draconian named Phelan, and his player was a power gamer and was constantly trying to maximize Phelan's abilities, and this player was very adept at doing so. And because there were so many players, it was always a risk of players getting bored or feeling like they didn't get enough time with the DM. But throughout most of the campaign, or at least the second half of the campaign, or maybe the middle, because Phelan was maximizing his power and doing all these other things, pushing back against Phelan became a rallying cry for the other players. It's kind of, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And while other players wouldn't always get along and their characters wouldn't always get along, they're like, well, as much as I may be annoyed at you, we can both agree that we hate Phelan. And it worked out because the player who controlled Phelan was like, okay, it can be 1 against 11, even though we're all in the same party. Like, that's cool. I can thrive off of that.
And it kept them coming back together to keep up with Phelan.
Exactly. Now, that is, I think, happens to be something that did happen, but I think it's also an exception to the rule. And the reality is that power gamers can be challenging players to manage in many settings. But let's talk about rules benders.
Also sometimes challenging.
Also can be challenging, yeah. A rules bender is kind of closely related to someone who just cheats, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but they see themselves as being completely different.
Oh yeah, totally different.
Totally different, right? When they cheat, and let's be honest, they are cheating in a way, it's not their fault that you didn't look at their sneakily placed token pile. It's not their fault that the rules aren't explicit about this thing that they're doing. So surely, in their mind, it's a fair game.
Yeah, what I see a lot with rule benders is they see something that they regard as unfair on the other side, and they bend the rules to compensate.
Mm.
I know some people who don't feel like their ability was used to the fullest extent, and so they say, oh, okay, well, I'll just use that again because I didn't get the value out of it or something like that. It can take up a lot of space in the player's brain, keeping track of slights and how we're going to get back at people, and it can really lead to bitterness where there isn't a need for it. As we said earlier in our table rules episode, it's always better to operate under the assumption that your opponent is playing honestly and strive to do likewise. Don't let bitterness live in your player brain because it really messes everything up. So there are a few positives about this sort of gamer. They seek out opportunities in games, and that's a classic invested trait of somebody who plays game. It's something we need. They often see things that others don't, like a gap in the rules, which is helpful if they can be encouraged to share that information. They can also be willing to metagame constructively. That means bringing concerns from outside of the game into the game. So, for example, they can treat new players differently or massage their play style so that the game night goes smoothly. Oh, I know that he is going to react badly if I poke him about this, so even though my character would, I just won't do that right now. And sometimes the rules are generally unclear, and having someone around who can figure out a sensible way forward and live with it is helpful.
I think a rules bender typically is much more interested in winning and seeing what they can do than playing within the spirit and intended rules of the game. But I also think that a rules bender's attention can be refocused on ways to play competitively within the intended rules of the game, which can actually often be more challenging than just finding the loopholes or the rules gaps.
Sure, if you could engage more of their power gamer as opposed to their rule bender.
Right.
So it's good to commend their creativity when they come up with something, but you also need to have clear and open discussions about the rules and the lack of rule interpretations. You need to make it clear that house rules or exceptions need to be discussed openly and like in advance, and you can't just make them up because they're suitable right now.
Let's talk about rules lawyers.
Yes, the natural enemy of the rule bender.
This person lives and breathes rule books. They tend to have encyclopedic knowledge.
To them, the rules are a sacred thing, and they're not impressed by those who bend them.
I actually have a little bit of rules lawyer in me, but only in certain contexts. And I think this rules lawyer in me is really a gamer in me wanting to discuss the metagame. So I will say that it really comes out in me when I'm playing a game with my dad. And I remember my dad and I have had some great discussions and debates over rules. And sometimes we've had great fun pausing a game that's just played between the two of us. We will not subject other people to this. But when we will pause a game between the two of us for 20 minutes to go online, look at forums, for 20 minutes or more to figure out the correct or intended way to play, even if it wasn't specifically mentioned in the rules. You know, we love to not just make up, like, okay, this is the ruling because we can't figure out. We really get into it and we're like, okay, based on this paragraph in the rules, what were the designers really intending here?
And it sounds like you guys have more fun doing that sometimes than actually playing the game.
Sometimes. But we also have looked at each other and be like, we just have to quit. Let's get back to the game and just decide.
Sure.
So rules lawyering can be a type of metagaming. I think it's just important to know your audience and know your fellow gamers.
Right.
And know if that's fun for them or if you just got to knock it off.
So the good thing about this gamer type is rules lawyers know the rules and they can keep you on track. They can also help break down the us versus them dynamic by helping both sides out of game. Sometimes you see this in role-playing games where a player will actually rule for the dungeon master and say, oh, actually, we can't do that because X. And that brings everybody out of the game a little bit and can sometimes diffuse tensions. The obvious negative about rules lawyers is there are times where figuring out what the rule actually is, or heaven forbid, rewinding the game 3 turns back to fix a rule violation that already occurred can take hours. Rules lawyers can have trouble moving forward and actually playing the game if things aren't technically correct, because sometimes this gets to them at a deep level.
And we did not mention this in our table rules episode, but I definitely think that 99 times out of 100, when a rule is new rules discovered, or you discover that you're playing something incorrectly, so now you know how to play correctly, you say either next game will play this way, or okay, from next round forward we will play this way, depending on what seems fair in the particular game. I mean, sometimes you can rewind a game 1 turn, or maybe even 2, but rewinding more than that is, in most games, really just not possible.
In general, if time travel isn't already a mechanic, don't add it. It's not going to go well.
It's not going to go well. It's going to be such a headache. No one's going to have fun with that. I will say, though, that because rules lawyers have such encyclopedic knowledge, typically, assuming they're right and unselfish in their rules, lore, and interpretation, just take their advice, unless it really, really doesn't work.
But usually, it's the rules, and getting salty about it is not a good thing.
Right.
So there's another type of gamer that we're going to refer to here as the no poker face gamer. These are the folks who will look overly serious or weirdly pained, like they're struggling with some moral dilemma whenever it comes time for them to bluff or be sneaky in a game. It's not really clear why it's so hard for this person to lie within the context of the game, but they often are kicking themselves for it soon after because they are very quickly found out and they will lose the game.
Producer's note, for those of you over the age of about 30, now you have also lost the game. Back to the show.
I have noticed, though, that there are some people that I've played games with that just because of their personal value system, they just don't want to lie. It doesn't matter if it is in real life or fictional or in the context of a game. They're just like, I don't do that. I don't lie. I tell the truth. That is my moral, ethical code. That is my value system. And I have no interest in playing a game or playing an aspect of a game that causes me to be dishonest. And I think it's important to respect that.
Yeah. That's fine. That just means that maybe the game for you is Go Fish rather than poker.
Exactly.
So this sort of player can actually add another layer of strategy to the game. They tend to draw a lot of focus with their blatantly bad lying, but the rest of the game is still going on around them. I once won a game of poker because someone was so focused on the foolish all-in player that they called with a decent hand, but they didn't consider at all whether I had a good hand, which I did, and I just sort of quietly won the game. One good thing about this gamer type is there are some people who just sort of aren't there yet, but they will be. Some people who don't know how to fib, but give them a little bit of extra time and they might develop this skill. And that's good because this is definitely a skill that you need when your friend asks you to pick you up at the airport at 2 a.m. and you get to say, oh, sure, yeah, I'd be happy to do that, as opposed to, well, you're my friend, so yes.
Airport pickups and drop-offs are part of life.
But if you can be pleasant about them, even though you may not feel pleasant about them, it makes everything go much more smoothly.
I personally actually really like airport pickups and drop-offs. Call me crazy, call me wacko.
I will make sure to have your number in my phone then.
You already do.
So, gamers, Pete's phone number is...
Yeah, maybe not do that. It's just, it's an excuse for me to drink more coffee, so I'm all about it. I do think that certain games can be frustrating for the no poker face players.
Absolutely.
And also frustrating for people who play games with no poker face players, because there are a number of games that just require fibbing, bluffing, lying. And so people who just choose not to do this type of thing, even as a game mechanic, are restricted considerably in the games that they will be willing to play well. So let's talk about the Deliberator.
Let's talk about him. The Deliberator is someone who generally thinks way too much about their move. It's one thing to contemplate what you're going to do next, but it's another to anguish over it for 15 minutes at a time, so fearful of making a mistake that you're caught up in a whirlwind of indecision. Some people are just paralyzed by the paradox of choice. They may be trying to determine the optimal course of action during their turn. They tend to think very carefully about what they're doing and why, and they tend to take the game very seriously.
I definitely had a little bit of Deliberator in me when I was a much younger gamer. I mean, I still do a little bit from time to time, but it's controlled and kind of minor. But I remember a time specifically when I was maybe 10 or 11, and I remember getting caught in this loop of being unsure of myself and what I was supposed to be doing and what the best move was. And I was actually playing Starfleet Battles, of all things, as a 10-year-old. And Starfleet Battles makes most games look like tic-tac-toe.
Very complex.
Very complex. And I got stuck of what to do, because I wanted to make the best move. And I was playing with a couple of older, more experienced gamers, and I didn't want to look silly or stupid or foolish. But what happened is I locked up and I was paralyzed and I was unwilling to do anything. And because of that, the game just crashed. And games are actually, I think, quite vulnerable to this. And so I think it's really important for people who tend to deliberate to realize, you know what? It's just a game. If we make a decision and it works, we learn something. If we make a decision and it doesn't work, well, we learn something else. No harm, no foul.
So the good news about this type of gamer is they're already at the place where they're taking the game seriously. They care, and that's something you can't teach. It's an important part of being a gamer. The problem, of course, is every minute you spend thinking about your turn in analysis paralysis is a minute of life that you've wasted for everyone else at the table. And it also gives them the opportunity to get distracted or otherwise disengage from the game, which obviously we don't want.
Give the Deliberator a lot of positive encouragement and just ask them to try something and see how it turns out. You can also give them a little bit of coaching or education, saying try to anticipate what they might do on their turn based on what other players are doing ahead of time. Encourage them to think about their turn in advance when it's possible during other players' turns. You can also consider imposing a time limit for each turn for everyone. Say you have 30 seconds or 15 seconds or 2 minutes or whatever makes sense for that game, and be like, you have to make your move at the end of this time, especially if you have a table full of deliberators who don't enjoy it, who it's not working for.
But even if there's only the one deliberator, Putting a time limit on everyone keeps you from singling that person out.
Absolutely. And you can also coach them to just stop taking games so seriously because, well, kind of the death knell of a game in a gaming group is somebody who doesn't take it seriously at all. If you take it so seriously that it's, your life depends on it, like that's not going to work if you lose the game.
Producer's note. Now you've lost the game a second time. Also, if you're over the age of 30, now is the time to take your Advil so you can get up tomorrow morning. Back to the show.
Yeah, and failing is a part of gaming.
Failing is a big part of gaming.
So yeah, it could be that this player has a difficulty with the paradox of choice. So maybe a game with a fewer options would be better for them, at least to ease them way in. See if they have an easier time with games where there is an obvious right move, or in games with fewer choices, or both. It could also be a working memory issue. It could be a lack of familiarity with a given game, or just general anxiety about the game or social anxiety. It could also be something else entirely. So, just try and walk them through this and help them get to where they can play with a bit more confidence.
So, the Smug Winner. Everybody enjoys winning a game. I love winning. The Smug Winner loves winning. And when they do win, they will not let their fellow gamers forget that they won. Even if you're playing 5 games at game night and the Smug Winner wins the first game and then loses 3, in the last game of the night, they're going to go, hey guys, remember when I won that game like 3 hours ago? And everyone else is going to go like, what the heck are you talking about? Who cares? We're not doing that anymore. I mean, even after enthusiastic congratulations are giving, this individual is still going to be fishing for more adulation. And I think it's important just to also help the Smug Winner realize, you know what? You won. Congratulations. It's still just a game. Let's move on.
Right. Let's not rest on our laurels.
Right. And there have been situations where I've been playing games with the Smug Winner and have played 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or more games with them in a session in the afternoon or evening. And I've kind of given a sarcastic response if they won games 1 and 2, and then I cream them the rest of the evening, and they'll say, hey, remember when I won those first 2 games? I'd be like, yeah, great. What have you done lately?
Oh, gosh.
Anywho.
So the other side of this coin, obviously, is the sore loser. They may say they don't care, but once they lose, they have this sour expression, folded arms, and quietly sulk through the next game. Really shows that they care very deeply and not necessarily in a healthy way. This person may start pointing out how the game is stupid, or you guys didn't play properly, or everyone was teaming up against me. Whatever it was, it certainly wasn't their fault. In some cases, people are actually gaming up on them, so you got to watch for that, make sure that's not what's going on here.
And I've definitely been in situations where I was playing my heart out, playing my best, and others were ganging up on me in a way that really was not fair play. They were ganging up on me to gang up on me, not in order to play their best game. And that stinks. That really does not feel good.
It does rankle, yeah.
Yeah, it does. However, I have never yelled or flipped a table over it. And I have played games with people who have flipped tables. I think one positive about the sore loser gamer type is that they clearly care very deeply about something. They may take the game too seriously, they may have misdirected anger or frustration, but they clearly care, and the game is having an emotional impact on them. And we want our games to have an emotional impact on us.
Again, it's a huge part of what makes gaming worthwhile at all, including those negative emotions.
Right. It has to be tolerable negative emotions and tolerable positive emotions.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So I think the goal and the challenge becomes, how do we redirect their passion, their energy, the frustration? Flipping tables or anything close to that is never okay, because that certainly violates other gamers' sense of safety.
And it's just obnoxious. But yeah, you try and give them a sense of control. There's always a next game. There's always a way to learn from your mistakes and do better next time. But yeah, you can't have people flipping tables. That's not negotiable.
Nope. No. I mean, people can get hurt and people can get triggered and so on and so forth. Never okay. So let's talk about the inattentive player or the distracted player. This person is constantly having side conversations, scrolling on their phone, leaving the game table or the room, just going in and out, zoning out.
They always need to be brought up to speed on what's going on. They're the one who looks up from their phone and says, huh? It's my turn? What? If you have to ask, it's your turn.
If you have to ask.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, this can be any player, but most often I think this is the player who is at game night for the people, for the social interaction, and they're really not there for the game at all.
Which can be tolerable, but if they're really not there for the game at all, something else needs to be done about that.
I mean, this is a player that you have to explain things 3, 5, even 10 times to, and they still don't get it because they're not really engaged. They're not listening. I do think this is maybe one of the most frustrating types of gamers to play new games with. It's just so hard to engage or re-engage. Just a huge time sink. And I'm going to be honest, this person really isn't enjoying the game.
No, they really aren't. They're unlikely to be a strong voice of conflict, but that's really not enough to offset the fact that they're not enjoying themselves. So you need to talk to them, see if this is a situational thing or if they really have no interest in the game or games in general. You know, there might be other activities that they would enjoy more. And that doesn't mean you have to stop being their friend, but having them come to the table and be tortured every week is not helping either.
And we talk so much on this podcast about how to bring people to the table, how to bring people to game night, how to introduce people to games. And that's something that we believe in very passionately. The flip side of that, though, is that we push gaming onto people and kind of force them to play games when gaming is really not their thing, and they do it simply because they want to continue to have a positive relationship with us, and they're like, okay, I'll try this thing, and they think it's going to be a one-shot deal and done forever, or at least until next holiday season or whatever. And, you know, gamers, we interpret that as, oh, they had a positive experience, and we're like, oh, we can play this other game tomorrow night and another game the night after that. And for them, that is, what the heck just happened to my life and to my evenings?
Right. Yeah, we want to bring players to the table. We don't want captives so much.
Right. And I think our passion for our hobby can often blind us. It certainly has blinded me before to the reality of the situation that the individual that I was playing games with and I thought was having a good time was a captive, unfortunately. At the same time, though, if you determine that they aren't a captive, they're just not playing the game that's for them, you know, find a game that is lighter and has more social interaction. That might be their thing.
It really might.
It might, but their thing is certainly not crunchy Euro games.
I mean, I was surprised recently that I managed to bring my dad to an escape room game. He really enjoyed himself.
I remember you telling me about this a few weeks ago.
Yeah. And so many times he's been at the gaming table and not enjoyed himself at all. But we found something that he actually enjoys, and that's wonderful. We had a great time playing with him. So anyway, I think that's enough of that. Moving on to another gamer type, we have the ultra competitive player. Now, this is the person who came to board night for one reason, and one reason alone, to win. Spending time with friends, bonding over fun experiences, that's cute. But this person wants to crush their opponents. If you're against them, expect a lot of trash talk about your play, and not a lot of sympathy.
I think very often the power gamer and the ultra competitive player get conflated into the same gamer type, but they're actually quite distinct. Where the power gamer wants to dominate, like I said, and wants to really matter, like you said, the ultra competitive player is focused on the end game, or the end of the game where they win. They are focused on the end game state, where I think a power gamer is really focused on what is happening during the duration of the game. They want to matter during the course of the game, versus an ultra competitive player just wants to get to that end game state where they win.
So a power gamer wants you to look up to him the whole time, but an ultra competitive player is just as happy to steal it away from you at the very last minute as long as they win.
Absolutely. Absolutely. From one vantage point, I'm splitting hairs here. I think from another vantage point, this distinction really matters because I think you have to engage these players in different ways.
True.
Again, for an ultra competitive player, what they might need is just a gaming group full of other ultra competitive players. Again, something positive about them is they very clearly care about the game.
And they're looking for a challenge as well. I mean, if they are really challenged but don't win, that can be a positive thing for them.
Right. Ultra competitive play is typically not a great space to bring newcomers to the hobby into, however.
Yeah, probably not.
For some, some people it is, some individuals will certainly thrive in that environment, and that's great. More power to you. But when you're bringing somebody new into a new hobby with a new game that they don't know about, and you throw in this ultra competitive element, most people, that's just going to shoot their anxiety through the roof in a way that makes them shut down. But again, your mileage may vary. What about explainers?
Yeah, let's move on to explainers. I always have a metaphor or an example ready. I love explaining things. It lets me explore the rules. And if I'm being honest, it can sometimes be a result of me showing off just a little bit. I'm different from a rules lawyer because I don't really care if I'm outvoted. I'm not going to sit there and say, oh, but on page 23, it actually says this. I care a lot more about having everyone on the same page than about following the rules as written. But I do like to talk.
This sounds like you. Rick.
Yeah, a little bit.
So, I mean, when the explainer pulls a box the size of a compact car containing 1,500 pieces, they swear this is going to be the best fun they ever had, right? That everyone has ever had. And you get past the first hour of explanations and you have 30 minutes of prep, and you can try to persuade them to leave this game for another time. But the chances are, I think, it doesn't matter. You're already monologuing again.
As our podcast listeners know, when you ask me a simple question about LARP, have a seat. You're going to be around for a bit.
Yeah.
So the good thing about this gamer type is we're happy to teach. A potential problem is, how do you stop us from continuing to teach you forever and ever and ever and ever? And I honestly don't know how to do that. Any idea, Pete?
I think sometimes you have to pull them aside and say, hey, we do need to give other people a voice. We're going to take the metaphorical microphone away from you and give it to somebody else.
Oh, my talking stick.
Yeah, that's, some explainers might actually need talking sticks. Let's be real. And you know what? That's not a bad thing. The bad thing is not realizing you need a tool, and so you don't employ it. But if a group realizes, hey, we need a tool, be it a talking stick or a talking bear or anything else, and things get better, that's a massive success. If you need it, you need it. And if you need it, use it, be it a talking stick or anything else.
And if you grow out of it, great. But if you don't, you're fine.
That's right. Let's talk about the host. The host is critical in the tabletop gaming community because a tabletop game, being a physical thing, unless if you're playing on, an online tabletop emulator or whatnot, you need a physical space to play it in. So this can be somebody's home or a board game cafe or a board game store or whatnot. But if you're typically in somebody's home, I think you need somebody to host that evening or that event or, whenever you're doing it. And the host likes to socially interact with friends and strangers alike. Typically, they may or may not have their own board game collection. They tend to be warm, inviting, and energetic, which is great.
It's incredibly important. My friend Lee from my Kansas days was our host. He's the one who came along and got me and brought me into D&D. He was a very welcoming, ruthless dungeon master, and he got me into gaming where I wouldn't have necessarily sought it out. Very important.
Somebody who freely opens up their home week after week or night after night surely deserves credit and sincere thanks. A great host is hard to come by, so if you know one or if you have one, treat them right. Let them know how much you appreciate them.
Sure.
There is, I think, some inherent challenge with the host, though, as a type of gamer, because unless members of that gaming group are incredibly familiar with the space and can kind of host themselves for the most part, the host has a lot of duties to make sure everybody's fed, make sure everyone knows where the restroom is, make sure not to go disrupt their son Timmy, who's asleep because they have school tomorrow, whatnot, right? So the host has a lot of responsibilities that actually pull them out of the game experience. And so if you have a member of your gaming group that really enjoys being the host, that's great.
It's probably important to give them a break every now and then.
Yes, absolutely. If you can have somebody else host, it's definitely something worth looking into. Don't take your host for granted. That's not going to work.
Because gamers can burn out. You don't want to see that happen, especially not with someone you rely on as much as you rely on your host.
So what about teachers?
So the teacher is the person in your group who has the attention span or understanding to comb through a 50-page rulebook. They are willing to communicate to others about the rules of the game, and they may or may not have a huge game collection. A little bit of an overlap with the explainer, but they tend to be a little less verbose.
I mean, this is the individual who's willing to watch tutorials and playthrough videos ahead of time in order to explain new games to an entire group instead of having the group floundering for hours. This is also an incredibly valuable member of your gaming group, so let them know you appreciate them.
And if you have new players coming in, which hopefully you do, the teacher is going to be invaluable. This is one that works very well with new players. So another type of gamer that we've mentioned on our other episodes is the quarterback.
So either they're a know-it-all strategist type who thinks they know every optimal move in the game, or they're super impatient and they can't bother to sit around while you contemplate your next move. So they tell you what to do. They say, I'm going to do XYZ and you do ABC, and then this other gamer on my other side is going to do NGP. And that really just makes other players appendages to the quarterback. Rather than having 3 or 4 players, you have one, and basically they have all of these assistants.
This can be a huge problem. It comes up a good deal in LARP. In Vampire the Masquerade, which is a vampire-themed LARP with chapters all over the country, experienced players have been known to bring along what they call ghoul friends. And a ghoul friend, or a pocket healer, is a second player whose character was designed by the quarterback in order to serve as their backup. This is a coconut clicker and a squire who gives the quarterback what they need without having any agency of their own. They've been referred to as like a magic item that has been designed by the quarterback. When this happens to people, they generally don't tend to hang around long, and their enjoyment of the game is really stunted. So if this is a tendency that you feel yourself, you really have to fight this.
And I think managing the quarterback really depends on their motivation. You know, is their motivation they want to talk a lot about the game and talk about moves? Okay, great. I try and coach that individual and talk about your turn, because, you know, tell new gamers what you are doing on your turn and why, right? Don't tell them what to do on their turn.
Or talk about it after the game.
If your goal is simply to control what other people do, maybe take a look at that because that's not going to go well long term.
But it's important to recognize that you all losing the game.
In comedy, we call this the rule of threes. You have all just lost the game one final time. We may actually say it more in this episode, but I'm not going to keep doing this bit. Thank you for indulging me thus far. Back to the show.
Is a far better outcome than you all winning the game, but nobody else felt like they had any agency.
If people don't have agency, they don't have buy-in. And if they don't have buy-in, they're not going to come back. It's really that simple.
And there's a reason why games have a losing state. They're not terrible things to lose a game.
They're really not. So related to losing games and winning games, let's talk about people who cheat in games. I mean, for the cheater, their need to win is so insatiable that they need to resort to cheating even when there's nothing on the line ultimately because it's a game.
Or even when they're winning, they'll still do their sneaky little thing and try to get one over on you.
And this is a really challenging individual to engage with in the context of their cheating behavior, because calling someone a cheater is a heck of an accusation. So if you're going to do that, A, you better as heck be correct.
Right.
And B, really consider the consequences of your actions about calling them out. I'm not saying don't call them out. I'm saying there are going to be consequences. There's going to be fallout when you call out a cheater. And that's ultimately not on you, right? You're not the person who has chosen to cheat.
But damage mitigation is important.
And give them the benefit of the doubt. The reality is that
I would rather lose a game because someone's cheating than have a conversation with somebody who's not cheating.
Oh, yeah. 10 times out of 10. Absolutely.
So it's important to understand what the cheater is trying to get out of this. Do they need to win, or are they just bored? Are they getting a thrill out of pulling one over on you? And is that more of a thrill than actually playing the game the way they're supposed to?
There are games where lying and bluffing and even cheating are actually part of the integrated rules. And if that is an urge that a player has, find games where their inner goblin can shine.
So let's move on to the hacker. So this is a player who has memorized every rule in the book. They have identified every loophole. And even if you're sure the game designer never intended the game to be played the way the hacker wants to play it, you can't necessarily stop them, because technically every piece of the wonderful machine they're building is actually in the game.
And you know what? Some of the jank they create is so beautiful. It's so well crafted. You have to respect it and just hand it to them.
It's true. I have had to fight the urge to give the hacker a standing ovation sometimes with some of the stuff they were able to pull.
I mean, they break the game to create their own pet project and just want a play experience that is different from the one that the game offers on the surface, positive or negative. And that can be great. That can really be great. It's interesting to see hackers and rules lawyers come together, and it can be beautiful to behold in terms of you just watch it. You're like, this is dynamite. Where's my camera? We're going to put this on YouTube.
Especially when the rules lawyer does not care at all about the spirit and is just saying, oh no, that's not possible. Wait, except if you slot in this thing, because this actually is broken in the way you're looking for.
I mean, other times you have to head for the hills.
Yeah.
But if you all respect each other and do it in good fun, and actually that kind of rhetoric and conflict can be positive, or it can be horrible and you have to manage it and set some ground rules.
And it really depends on what sort of game you're playing. You know, if you're talking about Magic the Gathering, for example, janky decks are just a lot of fun. And they often don't work terribly well, but they're beautiful when they do. If you're talking about something longer form, like Dungeons and Dragons, you need to be able to work around the hacker's hack, right? It's important to let them have some of it, you know? Mm-hmm. If they've managed to cheese their way into a different dimension and they're starting to steal power from the Shadow Realm, great, fantastic, let them do that. But then let the Shadow Realm react to them. Bring them back to a place where your core game rules are actually mattering, but let them have changed the stakes or changed the game they're playing.
And I actually had a Dungeons and Dragons player in a campaign that I managed a number of years ago. His name is Alan. I don't think he'll mind me using his actual name. His name is Alan. And he was the embodiment of both a rules lawyer and a hacker, in that he had encyclopedic knowledge of every book from every edition of D&D. And he also knew where all of the loopholes were. And he had that creative spark to, use those loopholes. And so, we'd be in the middle of a flow and doing the campaign, doing the story that we all took quite seriously, within the context of a game. And he would go off on this 7-paragraph monologue about how he could do X, Y, and Z. And all of my other players who had, some of which were playing for the first time would turn to him, Alec, what the heck are you talking about? And I, who had been playing and DMing D&D for years, would turn to Alan and say, Alan, what the heck are you talking about? But he was always right, so managing him so everyone had it fun and enjoyment and contributed and mattered was a challenge that I and the DM, as the DM, had to deal with.
But you let him be an asset to the party.
I did. It was not always easy, but I did. And I did not do it perfectly.
And at some point as the DM, you do have to say, okay, shut up. I've let you have enough.
I did that too. Plenty of times. I think I probably said that specifically. I'd say, Alan, shut up. And, he was a good sport. He dealt with it. Let's talk about the artist. The artist is a player who really could not possibly care less if they win or lose a game. They spend time choosing the color of their pieces, and they spend no time thinking about strategy. They may get enveloped in the theme, but they really just are there to look and see how beautiful everything is.
My wife is definitely one of these. She spent a literal hour in the Dragon Age character creator, and then when she actually got to the game, she didn't much like the actual game, but her character had to have her makeup done right.
Yeah, no, the makeup had to match, the boots had to match all the accessories.
And I was discussing this with her just the other day, and she said, well, yeah, she couldn't have mismatched stuff. You have to look good if you're going on a journey. She saw nothing wrong with that. It was just beautiful.
And more power to her, right? You know, if she gets blown away by a breath weapon, like, well, okay.
But she knows what she likes.
I think the challenge can be when you're gaming in a group and it's a game where players are dependent on the choices of their fellow players. And when an artist really wants to look good and other players want to win, even if they have mismatched shoes and, you know, a pot for a helmet, that can be difficult to navigate.
A big source of tension, yeah. And also, like any other thing, if you're spending hours on it and nobody else at the table cares, that can be a source of tension all on its own.
Yes. And so for some games, you can do that prep work ahead of time, but don't spend 2 hours picking out your outfit on game night. That's just not going to work.
No, it's not going to work for anybody unless your entire gaming group is artists, but I don't know that I've ever seen that happen.
Why would you be playing games at all if that's the case? I don't know.
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay, so let's talk about the gamer.
The gamer is... One of the important things for them is they always want to be a little bit more, a little bit extra. These are the people who will bring their own dice to a Yahtzee game.
I've done that, believe it or not.
I do believe it.
I did it more for the, you know, the attention to wow factor, right? Because I was playing with a group of non-gamers.
Sure.
They didn't even realize you could have any type of dice other than D6. And the fact that, you know, mine were metallic and green, they just blew them away. They had no idea what was happening.
So the gamer is a connoisseur, a professor, and frankly, a bit of a know-it-all.
That's not me at all.
Obviously not. But whether the gamer is a delight or a chore to play with really depends on how they dish out their encyclopedic game knowledge.
So I definitely identify as a gamer in terms of gamer types. And, you know, I think gamers are those friends who'll bring over a new board game every time you hang out with people. They'll figure out the nuances of it. They'll keep things moving along. They want everyone to have fun. But, I mean, I love going out to bars as much as the next guy or, you know, going to a concert or going for a hike or whatever else. But I love playing games and I love discussing the metagame. So if I'm around friends who are willing to do that, that's gonna be my default activity.
And that's also how you get to know people.
I forget who said it, right? That saying of you can size up a people by the games that they play, right? And that's been revamped by others to say almost right. It actually depends on how you play. And that to me is goal. I'm like, absolutely. I can tell a lot about a person by how they play the games that they play.
And as we've said before, when you're playing a game, sometimes psychology comes very easily to the fore.
I think some negatives about the gamer type, and I'm guilty of all of these, is that gamers will remark about the current version of a game that's being played and say, oh, this version isn't as good as this out-of-production version or the version that's coming out next month. I've said that before. I'm like, oh, you know, the version that's coming out next month is going to be way better than this version. And people have glared at me and say, well, we can't play that version yet. Now can we? So shut up and take your turn.
And that's assuming that their eyes haven't already glossed over.
Right, exactly. What can you do? Gamers are really at their worst when they are talking about a game that was issued by a company that no longer exists, and the only people who are really playing that game are the people who are following the rules written in the original Latin. I mean, you know the type.
Yeah, I sure do.
And if our goal is to make connections with people, this is just not how to do it.
It's a hard line to walk because having a little bit of the history of gaming is obviously great. Having 3 books of it is not great if you're new and just trying to get to where you can play.
What about just want to have fun players?
Yes. These are the folks who are not playing to win so much as just enjoying spending time with friends. They tend to enjoy games that involve a steady stream of mood-enhancing effects, because it can be fun to have everybody say, oh, and yeah, and even the negative effects can be fun to bond over socially. The good thing about these folks is they're just here to be with friends, so they can be amazing mediators, and they can be good at reminding people, oh, this is just a game, guys, let's not get too heated. Sometimes you need that.
I think on the flip side of that, one negative about this gamer type is that they don't care about the actual game, which it can be a problem when it's required of them. They just want to have fun, and if that means putting the game down and walking away and doing something else after 2 turns or 5 turns or 12 turns, that's what they're going to do. They will follow the path of least resistance.
Absolutely. And staying in character, for example, in a role-playing game can sometimes be too much for them.
And I think for just want to have fun players, it's really important to find the right gaming group for them, because this is not the player you want at Wargame night, where a war game is going to go on for 6 hours and people are going to be sweating over combat tables and things like that. They won't engage with it, and they will disrupt people who just really love that crunchy stuff.
Whereas apples to apples might be a much better fit.
What about trash talkers?
This is all of us, at least sometimes. It's all about intimidating the competition, or if that fails, annoying them into submission, or just keeping them occupied, keeping on poking them and hoping they make a mistake.
I think, with a light attitude, not taking it too seriously, the trash talker can keep everyone engaged and excited and even get them laughing and help people laugh at their own mistake.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, but too much trash talk, especially in combination with a run of bad luck, can really spoil the mood and discourage repeat games. Again, especially for new players who may not know that this is just how things are done.
And I've been part of game nights and game groups where the trash talk is just at a crazy level, where people are saying words that I will not say on this podcast, but they're being flung back and forth constantly, and it's all in good fun. And that works for that group, but it is not a place for most new people. I mean, some people are going to thrive on that, again, and that's great, but it is not a place where I would bring most people I was trying to get into the hobby, because they would most likely just be stressed out and not know the social protocol and not know what was happening.
Yeah, if somebody needs to get jumped into your gaming group, that's something you have to look at. At some point, trash talking is just bullying. You need to make sure that you stop well before that point and that everybody is genuinely having a good time. Because bullying people is never okay.
Never okay, never an excuse under any circumstances for bullying. So let's talk about the newbie as we start to wrap up here. And, the newbie, or the person new to games, they're excited, they're nervous, they're excited about the options they have. They're not really sure what they're doing or what's going on. But almost universally, the newbie wants to play games. They don't want to talk about gaming. And I think we mentioned this in our last episode.
And even if this is somebody who's destined to become a gamer, if they don't have any stories to tell or stories to think about, there's not a lot of meat for them to sink their teeth into. So get in there and actually play with them. The obvious positive about the newbie is this is our lifeblood. This is our future. It keeps the hobby from dying. A potential problem you have to watch out for is it is important to make a good first impression. It's important not to scare the newbie away or convince them not to come back. And that means you're going to have to rein in some of the other tendencies we've talked about and make sure that they're serving the game and the newbie as much as possible.
And I think we're going to have a podcast episode in the future that talks all about how to treat newcomers to the table and make sure they have a good time, and make sure, if the goal of their first session is to make sure they have a second session. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, I'd be shocked if we didn't have an episode on that.
Yeah. As we come to a close here, I want to talk about a gamer type that I'm actually not even convinced is real. They're certainly a stereotype, but I think they might only exist in Netflix shows like Stranger Fiction and places like that. I've never seen this in real life at the gaming table, but I definitely have seen this in media quite a bit, which is the younger sibling. The younger sibling that tags along to board game night, is annoying, interrupts, doesn't pay attention, and they give me a chuckle. But I would love to know if any of our listeners have actually experienced the younger sibling at game night in a way that was kind of this caricature of this person that you had to kind of babysit at the gaming table. And I don't just mean bringing your kid along or your younger sibling chronologically who's engaged with the table. That's not what I'm talking about.
The good thing about having a younger person who looked at the game like this would be they have a great imagination. They're able to think about outside the box and outside the gaming system. But the flip side of that is they seem to have no respect for the world of the game. and it can be very difficult to have them actually play and understand what's going on. But again, I don't know that I've ever experienced this myself either.
And I would love to know, right? But, stereotypically, that younger sibling, it's like, oh, I want to be a fairy princess or unicorn. It's like, well, we're playing Battletech, so that's not part of this world. Although, if you really want to get creative, you could incorporate that.
You'd need a whole new rule set is the problem.
Maybe. Challenge for another day.
I think mostly this is a way of sort of smuggling the audience into that gaming room and giving them maybe a perspective to look at it from. Oh, this is the person who doesn't understand what's going on, so they can be mystified by all the gamer speak. Anyway.
We really do hope that you took something away from this episode on different types of gamers to help facilitate the conversation at your own gaming table. We would love to know what gamer types we missed, because this was certainly not comprehensive. We could not possibly make it be in one episode. It was never intended to be. But what style of play do you like? What gamer type are you? We would love to know.
Right. Please let us know either by leaving comments or emailing us directly at coraxandcoffee@gmail.com. We love gaming stories. If you got it, send it, please.
Please do consider supporting us on the podcast. We do have monthly subscriptions for the podcast specifically, the link for which is in the show notes of this and every other Corax and Coffee Cast episode. I do want to make it very clear that this is purely a volunteer-based subscription. If you choose not to sign up for a donation subscription for our podcast, it will in no way limit your ability to listen to our content. All of our podcast content is completely free.
Yeah, and we're never going to put it behind a paywall. Monetary support or no, please like and subscribe or sign up to get alerts when we post new content. Please visit our website at www.coraxandcoffee.com, and please consider supporting us on Patreon or through our merch store.
Until next time, I'm your host, Pete Steele.
And I'm your other host, Rick Hendricks. Take care, all.
Bye.
I know I promised I'd drop the lost the game bit, but it occurred to me that you might not actually be aware of what that game is. The rules are pretty simple. Basically, if you remember that you're playing the game, then you just lost. This can happen anytime you hear the word game in any context. You have to announce, I lost the game, and then everyone around you has to also repeat they lost the game, because now they remember they're playing. It's not about who loses first, that does suck, but the worst part is being the last person in a group to lose. It's also good to note that you have about a 5 to 10 minute window to reset yourself and give yourself time to forget that you're playing. This time frame is different in each group. There you go, free game content. Helping you lose the game on today's Corax and Coffee Cast were your unshrinking hosts Pete Steele and Rick Hendricks. Music, sound production, and bonkers outros like this come from the mind of me, Keegan King. Special thanks to Sarah Vasa and Miss Shaw for just putting up with this madness. If you like the podcast, and why wouldn't you, it's lovely, you may enjoy our written game reviews, unboxing videos, print and play games, and other fun stuff that can be found at coraxandcoffee.com. You can also support us through our Spotify/Anchor link at the show notes on Spotify, buying things from our merch store, and or supporting us at Patreon at whatever amount you think our content is worth. There's also free and exclusive merch and a newsletter, so now's the time. Also, Betty White's birthday is on January 17th, and she's going to be 100 years old. Isn't that wild? The quote of the week: when the world gets bad enough, the good go crazy, but the smart, they go bad. Corax and Coffee. Tabletop gaming, caffeinated.